Last night you set your alarm for 6. You went to bed at midnight because there were things to do and screens to check and one more episode that played automatically, and by the time you noticed it was already too late. 6 hours. Maybe 5.5 after the tossing and the waking up once in the dark and the thoughts about tomorrow that wouldn't stop circling. The alarm went off and you didn't feel rested. You haven't felt rested in months, maybe years. You can't actually remember the last time you woke up and thought, I feel good, I have energy, I'm ready. You got up anyway, because that's what you do. You got up and you made it through the morning and you made it through the commute and you made it through the meetings and the emails and the tasks and the conversations where you smiled even though you were running on fumes. And somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, the tiredness hit you in the chest like something heavy. Not sleepiness, something deeper, something that coffee doesn't touch. The kind of tired where your brain goes quiet in the middle of a sentence because it ran out of fuel. The kind where you sit in your car after work for 10 minutes before going inside because you need to gather enough energy to be a person for your family. And you think this is normal. You think everyone feels this way. You think this is just what adult life is. Work, tiredness, recovery that never quite finishes, work again. Here's what nobody has told you. The tiredness is not a personal problem. It's not your scheduling, not your sleep hygiene, not your failure to meditate or meal prep or wake up at 5 to journal. The tiredness is a product, manufactured daily by an economic system that needs you depleted. Your exhaustion is not a side effect of the economy. It is the economy. The whole thing runs on it. The productivity gap between what you create and what you're paid. The cost of living that makes working less financially impossible. The technology that erased the boundary between work hours and your hours. The culture that convinced you that your worth is your output, so you'd police your own overwork without anyone having to force you. You were never meant to solve this with a better morning routine. You were meant to stay too tired to see it clearly. This audiobook changes that. Over the next hour, you'll see the full machine, how the exhaustion economy works, how your tiredness is manufactured through 5 specific daily processes, what exhaustion takes from you that's far more valuable than energy, why every solution you've tried, the productivity hacks, the self-care products, the boundary-setting advice, the mindset shifts, has failed, and what actually works when you stop treating a structural problem as a personal one. 1 hour. If you're listening to this on your commute, in bed, on a break, wherever you are right now, just listen. You don't need to optimize anything. You don't need to take notes. You just need to hear what nobody has explained to you before. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Exhaustion Economy. Why the system needs you depleted. Every economic system has an operating requirement, a condition that must be maintained for the system to function as designed. The operating requirement of the current economic model is a workforce that is perpetually busy, perpetually consuming, and perpetually too depleted to engage in the kind of sustained critical thinking that might lead to questioning the arrangement. Your exhaustion isn't a side effect. It's the operating condition. And the system maintains it through mechanisms so embedded in the structure of daily life that they feel like nature rather than design. Mechanism 1. The productivity compensation gap. This is the engine of the exhaustion economy. Over the past 50 years in most industrialized nations, worker productivity has risen dramatically. Technology, process optimization, and increased working intensity have made each worker significantly more productive per hour than their counterpart 50 years ago. If compensation had risen with productivity, the average worker today would earn substantially more than they do. They don't. Compensation has grown at a fraction of the rate of productivity growth. The mathematical result is simple and devastating. You produce more value per hour than workers have ever produced in history, and you capture less of that value proportionally than workers have captured in decades. This is crucial. The gap between productivity and compensation isn't a market anomaly. It's the system's primary wealth transfer mechanism. Every hour you work, you produce value. Some of that value returns to you as wages. The rest, the gap, flows upward, to shareholders, to executive compensation, to capital accumulation by the ownership class. Your exhaustion is the fuel for this transfer, because the transfer requires you to keep producing at high intensity. And high-intensity production over sustained periods produces exhaustion. You're not tired because you're unproductive. You're tired because you're extremely productive, and most of the value your productivity creates is being captured by someone else. Mechanism 2. The cost of living squeeze. Even if your nominal wages have risen over time, the cost of the basics, housing, health care, childcare, education, food, and transportation, has risen faster. The result is that you need to work more hours or more intensely or both, just to maintain the same standard of living that fewer hours purchased a generation ago. Your parents could support a household on a single income. You need 2 incomes and a side hustle to approximate what one income used to cover. The cost of living squeeze doesn't just reduce your financial margin. It eliminates the option of working less. You can't choose to work 30 hours a week because 30 hours doesn't cover rent. The squeeze removes the choice. And the removal of choice is what makes the exhaustion compulsory rather than optional. You're not choosing to be exhausted. You're being forced into it by the arithmetic of survival. Most people miss this about why the cost of living squeeze accelerates exhaustion rather than just maintaining it. As costs rise, people take on additional work, longer commutes for cheaper housing, side hustles to cover gaps, and overtime whenever available. Each additional commitment reduces recovery time. Reduced recovery time reduces cognitive function, emotional resilience, and physical health. Reduced function leads to decreased efficiency, which leads to needing even more hours to maintain the same output. The squeeze creates a downward spiral where the harder you work, the more depleted you become, and the more depleted you become, the harder you need to work to compensate for the depletion. The system doesn't just make you tired. It traps you in a cycle where tiredness generates more tiredness. Mechanism 3. The always-on infrastructure. The technology that was supposed to free you has instead enslaved you to a workday with no boundaries. This was sold to you as liberation, work from anywhere, flexible schedules, the freedom to step away from the desk. What it actually created was the inability to step away from work, because work is no longer a place you go. It's a condition that follows you. Email follows you home. It sits in your pocket. It buzzes during dinner. It lights up your nightstand at 3 in the morning. Slack messages arrive at midnight from colleagues in different time zones. Your phone, the device that was supposed to connect you to the people you love, has become the primary channel through which the system maintains its claim on your attention during every waking hour and some of the sleeping ones. The physical workday may end when you leave the office, if you have an office to leave. But the psychological workday never ends. Your nervous system never fully exits work mode, because work mode can reactivate at any moment through the device in your pocket. The email you haven't checked might contain a crisis. The message you haven't read might contain a demand. The notification you ignored might have consequences. And even when you don't check, the knowledge that you should check, that something might be waiting, that the system might need you right now, maintains a state of low-grade cognitive activation that prevents the deep rest your body is desperate for. Research on the effects of after-hours digital connectivity shows that the mere expectation of being available, even when no actual work communication occurs during the evening, produces measurable stress hormone elevation and prevents the deep recovery that the brain and body require to function optimally. You don't need to actually work in the evening to be depleted by work in the evening. You just need to know that you might be called upon. The expectation alone is enough to prevent recovery. And the expectation is constant. Because the infrastructure is constant, the device never turns off. The connection never severs. The system's reach never ends. And your nervous system, which evolved to cycle between activation and recovery, between threat response and rest, is held in a permanent state of semi-activation that degrades every system in your body over time. Here's what actually happens to the human body and mind when the recovery period is eliminated. The stress response system, designed for acute threats followed by full recovery, is held in a state of chronic low-grade activation. Cortisol remains elevated. Sleep architecture is disrupted. The deep sleep stages where physical repair, memory consolidation, and emotional processing occur are shortened or eliminated. The immune system is suppressed. Inflammatory markers rise. Cognitive function degrades. Emotional regulation weakens. Decision-making quality decreases. And the exhausted person, functioning at a fraction of their capacity, is told that the problem is their morning routine, their meditation app, their failure to drink enough water or take enough walks or practice enough gratitude. The problem is never identified as the system that removed recovery from the human operating schedule and replaced it with availability. Mechanism 4. The identity fusion. The system doesn't just need your time, it needs your identity. The cultural programming of the last several decades has deliberately fused personal identity with professional productivity. You are what you do. Your value as a human being is measured by your output. Your worth is your work. This fusion transforms exhaustion from a problem to be solved into a badge to be worn. "I'm so busy" becomes a status declaration. "I haven't had a day off in weeks" becomes a humble brag. "I work 60 hours a week" becomes an identity marker that signals importance, dedication, and value as a person. The real reason identity fusion matters economically is that it makes the worker self-policing. The system doesn't need to force you to work beyond healthy limits. Your identity does the forcing. Because if your worth is your productivity, Then resting feels like worthlessness. Taking time off feels like failing. Setting boundaries feels like laziness. The identity fusion makes you the enforcer of your own exhaustion, and the enforcement is invisible because it doesn't feel like enforcement. It feels like ambition, like drive, like the natural expression of who you are. The system doesn't need whips and chains when it has identity and culture. You drive yourself to exhaustion and call it passion. You sacrifice your health for your career and call it dedication. You abandon your relationships for your work and call it providing. The exhaustion economy runs on all four mechanisms simultaneously. The productivity gap extracts your value. The cost squeeze eliminates your choice. The always-on infrastructure removes your recovery. And the identity fusion makes you complicit in your own depletion. Together, these mechanisms produce a population that is too tired to think clearly, too busy to organize effectively, too depleted to resist meaningfully, and too identified with their work to even recognize that the arrangement is not natural. It's designed. Now let's look at exactly how the manufacturing process works in your daily life. Chapter 2. The manufacturing process, how your tiredness is produced daily. Your exhaustion isn't produced by a single cause. It's manufactured through a daily process with multiple production lines running simultaneously. Each line removes a piece of your energy. No single line is catastrophic. Together, they leave you depleted by mid-afternoon and empty by evening. And the process resets each morning, ready to extract again. Production Line 1. The commute tax. For millions of workers, the workday begins long before they arrive at work. The average commute time has steadily increased over decades as housing costs push workers further from employment centers. Each minute of commuting is a minute of energy extraction that produces no value for the worker. No income, no advancement, no skill development, no relationship building. Just time and energy consumed by the mechanical process of moving your body from where you can afford to live to where you need to work. Research on commuting and well-being consistently identifies commuting as one of the activities most damaging to daily happiness and energy levels. A long commute doesn't just waste time. It actively drains cognitive and emotional resources that are then unavailable for the work itself, for relationships, or for any pursuit that matters to you as a human being. This is crucial. The commute exists because the system separates where people can afford to live from where people need to work. This separation is a direct product of the cost of living squeeze. As housing costs near employment centers rise, workers are pushed to the periphery. The commute is the daily tax on that displacement, and the tax is paid entirely by the worker, in energy, in time, in health. In the lost hours that could have been spent sleeping, exercising, cooking a real meal, or connecting with the people they love. The employer doesn't pay the commute tax. The shareholder doesn't pay it. The worker pays it, every day, silently, and arrives at work already partially depleted before the workday has even started. Production Line 2. The decision fatigue cascade. Modern life requires an unprecedented volume of daily decisions: what to eat, what to wear, how to respond to dozens of messages, which tasks to prioritize, how to navigate interpersonal dynamics at work, how to manage childcare logistics. how to handle the unexpected disruption that occurs every single day without fail. Each decision, no matter how small, consumes a measurable amount of cognitive energy. And the volume of decisions required by modern life far exceeds the cognitive budget that the human brain evolved to handle. Most people miss this about why decision fatigue hits harder when you're economically constrained. Every decision that involves money becomes exponentially more taxing when money is scarce. The affluent person decides where to eat without mental cost because any option is affordable. The financially constrained person runs a cost-benefit analysis for every meal. Can I afford this? Is there a cheaper option? Should I skip lunch to save money for dinner? Each financial calculation is a decision that drains the same cognitive resource pool as complex professional decisions. By midday, the person living under financial constraint has made hundreds of micro-decisions about resource allocation that the affluent person never had to make. And the cognitive budget that was consumed by those financial calculations is no longer available for the work that earns the income that was the subject of the calculations. The loop is devastatingly efficient. Production line 3. The emotional labor extraction. Many modern jobs require not just physical or cognitive output but emotional performance. Service workers must smile regardless of their internal state. They must be cheerful when they're grieving, warm when they're angry, helpful when they're overwhelmed. Professionals must project confidence regardless of their anxiety, certainty regardless of their confusion, enthusiasm regardless of their demoralization. Managers must display calm regardless of the pressure bearing down on them from every direction. They must be supportive of their team while being squeezed by their superiors. They must absorb other people's stress while hiding their own. This emotional labor, the systematic management of feelings and facial expressions as a requirement of continued employment, is one of the most exhausting forms of work because it requires two simultaneous operations: suppressing your authentic emotional response and performing an artificial one. Both operations consume energy. The suppression takes energy. The performance takes energy. And neither operation is acknowledged, compensated, or even recognized as work by the system that demands it. Research on emotional labor and burnout shows that jobs requiring high emotional labor produce significantly higher rates of exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment compared to jobs where emotional authenticity is permitted. The exhaustion from emotional labor is qualitatively different from physical or cognitive exhaustion. It's a depletion of the self, a hollowing out of authentic experience that accumulates into a condition where you no longer know what you actually feel, because the performance has been running for so long that the performer and the performance have blurred together. The emotional labor isn't limited to the workplace. At home, the exhausted worker performs a second shift of emotional labor that nobody counts and nobody compensates. Being present for a partner when you have nothing left to give. Being patient with children when your reserves are completely empty. Answering, "How was your day?" with something other than the truth, because the truth, that you're so depleted you can barely form sentences, isn't what your family needs to hear. Projecting stability when your internal state is collapse, being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who holds it together, The performance never stops because the people who need you don't stop needing you just because the workplace already extracted your emotional capacity 8 hours ago. The system takes your emotional energy at work, and your family needs your emotional energy at home, and the total demand exceeds the total supply. It always has. There was never enough for both. The deficit is built into the design, and the deficit is paid by the worker in burnout, numbness, and the slow withdrawal from genuine feeling that eventually looks like apathy, but is actually protection. Production line 4. The recovery sabotage. After the commute, the decisions, and the emotional extraction, the system has one more production line, sabotaging whatever recovery might occur in the remaining hours. It does this through the attention economy, the infinite scroll, the algorithmic feed designed by teams of engineers to capture your attention and hold it past the point where you intended to stop. The streaming service that autoplays the next episode. The social media platform that triggers just enough emotional response to keep you scrolling when your body is begging for sleep. Here's what actually happens to recovery when the attention economy captures your remaining hours. Sleep is delayed. The blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production. The emotional activation from content consumption prevents the mental deceleration required for sleep onset. The hours between work ending and sleep beginning, which should be recovery H. Hours are converted into consumption hours, and consumption isn't recovery, it's a different form of extraction. The attention economy monetizes your remaining energy the same way your employer monetizes your working energy. You arrive at the end of the day with a small reserve of energy. The attention economy takes that too, and you wake up the next morning having never fully recovered from the previous day. The debt accumulates, day after day, week after week, until the tiredness isn't a condition anymore. It's your identity. Production line 5. The guilt loop. As a final mechanism, the system installs guilt about the exhaustion itself. You're tired and you feel guilty about being tired, because the productivity culture says that tiredness is a symptom of poor optimization, of insufficient discipline, of failure to implement the right morning routine or productivity system or wellness practice. The guilt adds a layer of psychological exhaustion on top of the physical, cognitive, and emotional exhaustion already produced by the other production lines. You're not just tired. You're tired and ashamed of being tired, which makes you more tired. The guilt doesn't motivate recovery, it prevents it. Because recovering, resting, doing nothing triggers more guilt, which triggers more doing, which produces more exhaustion. The loop has no exit because the exit, rest, is the thing the guilt won't permit. The manufacturing process is complete. 5 production lines operating daily. Commute tax, decision fatigue cascade, emotional labor extraction, recovery sabotage, and the guilt loop. Together they produce a state of chronic depletion so normalized that you don't recognize it as produced. You think it's just life. It's not life. It's a manufacturing process, and you're both the raw material and the product. Chapter 3. What exhaustion takes from you, the costs nobody calculates. The obvious cost of exhaustion is tiredness. The non-obvious costs are the ones that are actually destroying your life. Because exhaustion doesn't just make you tired. It systematically dismantles every capacity you need to build a life worth living. And it does this so gradually, so quietly, and so comprehensively that you don't notice what's being taken until it's been gone for years. Hidden cost 1. Your critical thinking. An exhausted brain doesn't think critically. It doesn't question. It doesn't analyze. It doesn't evaluate whether the narrative it's being told matches the reality it's experiencing. An exhausted brain conserves energy by accepting defaults, accepting the status quo, accepting the explanation given rather than generating alternative explanations, accepting the price rather than negotiating, accepting the condition rather than challenging it. This is not a metaphor. Research on cognitive function under fatigue shows measurable decreases in analytical reasoning, problem solving, and the ability to detect inconsistencies in information. The exhausted person is more susceptible to manipulation, more likely to make poor financial decisions, more likely to accept unfavorable terms, and less likely to notice when they're being taken advantage of. This is crucial. The system needs you to not think critically. Critical thinking is the threat. A worker who thinks critically about the productivity compensation gap becomes a worker who demands better compensation. A consumer who thinks critically about the attention economy becomes a consumer who stops consuming. A citizen who thinks critically about the political structures that maintain the exhaustion economy becomes a citizen who demands structural change. Critical thinking is the enemy of every system that benefits from the current arrangement, and exhaustion is the most efficient critical thinking suppressant ever engineered. It doesn't censor thought. It doesn't ban books. It doesn't imprison dissidents. It just makes people too tired to think. The effect is the same. The method is invisible. Hidden cost 2. Your relationships. Relationships require energy, not the performative energy of being present in the same room while scrolling your phone. The actual energy of attention, emotional availability, vulnerability, curiosity about another person's inner life, and the patience to navigate disagreement without escalating into conflict. Exhaustion eliminates all of this. The exhausted person comes home and performs the appearance of being present, while their actual cognitive and emotional capacity is depleted. Their partner receives the leftovers. Their children receive whatever remains after the employer took the best hours, and the commute took the transition hours, and the attention economy took the recovery hours. Most people miss this about how exhaustion destroys relationships slowly rather than suddenly. There's no dramatic fight, no single moment of failure, just a gradual, imperceptible withdrawal of real presence that accumulate. Ease over months and years until the relationship is structurally intact but emotionally hollow. Both people live in the same house. Both are performing the roles. But the actual connection, the real intimacy that requires two fully present humans, has been eroded by the systematic extraction of the energy that intimacy requires. And when the relationship eventually fails, both people blame themselves or each other. Nobody blames the system that made them too tired to be genuinely present in their own lives. Hidden cost 3. Your health. The link between chronic exhaustion and physical health deterioration is one of the most extensively documented patterns in medical research. Chronic sleep deprivation alone, which affects a significant percentage of working adults, is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, immune suppression, cognitive decline, and shortened lifespan. Add chronic stress, inadequate nutrition due to time constraints, insufficient physical activity due to schedule demands, and the inflammatory effects of sustained psychological pressure, and you have a health profile that the medical system treats as individual risk factors rather than what they actually are. The predictable health consequences of an economic system that requires sustained human depletion. Here's what actually happens when you calculate the true cost of work-related exhaustion on health over a career. The worker who maintains a pace of chronic depletion for decades arrives at retirement, if they reach retirement, with a body that has been systematically degraded by the conditions of employment. The chronic diseases they now manage aren't bad luck. They're the accumulated cost of selling their health for wages over 30 or 40 years. And the medical system treats these conditions as diseases to be managed rather than consequences to be prevented, because prevention would require changing the conditions that produced the consequences, and changing those conditions would require challenging the economic system that profits from them. Hidden cost 4. Your ambition. This is the cost that locks the cage from the inside. Exhaustion doesn't just prevent you from acting on your ambitions. It prevents you from having ambitions in the first place. When all of your cognitive and emotional energy is consumed by the daily production cycle, when every unit of mental capacity is allocated to surviving the current week, there is nothing left to dream with, nothing left to plan with, nothing left to imagine a different future with. The creative energy that would generate new ideas is consumed. The strategic thinking that would plan new directions is exhausted. The courage that would fuel risk-taking is depleted. The hope that would sustain long-term effort is drained. The big idea you might have had if you weren't so tired. The business you might have started if you had the energy to plan it after work. The creative project you might have pursued if your weekends weren't spent recovering from your weeks. The career change you might have made if you could think clearly enough to strategize the transition. The education you might have sought if you had the bandwidth to study. The book you might have written. The movement you might have joined. The relationship you might have deepened. All of these require surplus energy. Energy beyond what survival and daily function require. And the exhaustion economy is designed to eliminate surplus energy entirely, completely, with mechanical precision. You have exactly enough energy to work, consume basic entertainment, sleep insufficiently, and recover just enough to work again. That's the allocation. That's the budget. Ambition requires a surplus that the system is designed to never permit. And the absence of ambition, the flatness, the going through the motions quality that characterizes so many exhausted lives is interpreted as a character trait. They lack drive. They're not ambitious. They've settled. No, they haven't settled. They've been depleted. The drive is there. It's buried under layers of manufactured exhaustion, and it will return the moment the extraction pauses long enough for the human being underneath to remember what they actually wanted before the system told them what to want. Hidden cost 5. Your awareness of the system itself. This is the most elegant cost, the most efficient, the one that makes all the other costs invisible. Exhaustion prevents you from seeing that exhaustion is designed. You're too tired to read about economic systems, too tired to analyze your own financial position with clarity, too tired to attend community meetings or engage in political processes that could change the conditions producing your exhaustion, too tired to organize with other exhausted people, too tired to think about why you're tired. The exhaustion produces the ignorance that protects the exhaustion, a perfect closed loop, self-sustaining, self-concealing, and running with the efficiency of a machine that's been optimized over decades. The real reason these hidden costs matter more than the tiredness itself is that they represent the true price of the exhaustion economy. The price isn't your energy. Energy returns with rest. The price is your life, your relationships, your health, your potential, your freedom to think independently and imagine differently and build something beyond the cycle. The exhaustion economy doesn't just make you tired, it makes you smaller, narrower, less capable, less connected, less alive. And it does this so gradually that you adjust to each reduction without noticing it. Like a frog in water that heats so slowly the frog never jumps. You're not jumping because you're too tired to feel the temperature changing. Chapter 4. Why every solution you've tried has failed. You've tried to fix the tiredness. Of course you have. You've tried the productivity systems, the morning routines, the meditation apps, the time management frameworks, the boundary-setting techniques, the self-care rituals, the wellness subscriptions, the podcast episodes about optimizing your energy. You've tried, and the tiredness remains, not because you implemented the solutions poorly, because the solutions were designed for a different problem than the one you actually have. Why the solutions fail. Every mainstream solution to exhaustion treats exhaustion as a personal optimization problem. Your schedule needs adjusting. Your habits need improvement. Your mindset needs shifting. The assumption beneath every solution is that the system is fine and you need to function better within it. But the system isn't fine. The system is the cause. And personal optimization within a system designed to exhaust you is like rearranging furniture on a sinking ship. The room looks better. The ship is still going down. Failed Solution 1. Productivity systems. Getting things done, time blocking, the Pomodoro technique, inbox zero. These systems promise that if you manage your tasks more efficiently, you'll free up time and energy. They don't. They allow you to do more work in less time, which means more work gets assigned to fill the freed time. Productivity systems don't reduce your workload. They increase your throughput. And increased throughput in a system that captures the value of your production doesn't benefit you. It benefits the system. You've optimized your ability to be exploited. This is crucial. Productivity is not the problem. You are already among the most productive workers in human history. More productivity doesn't produce more rest. It produces more extraction. The person who implements a productivity system and increases their output by 20% doesn't get 20% more rest. They get 20% more work, because the system absorbs productivity gains instantly. The efficiency you create becomes the new baseline expectation. And the exhaustion returns at the higher output level within weeks. Failed Solution 2. Self-care as product. The wellness industry has commodified the response to the exhaustion economy and sold it back to you at retail. Bath bombs, scented candles, meditation apps with monthly subscriptions, yoga retreats that cost a month's rent, skincare routines that add 30 minutes to your morning. The self-care industry doesn't solve exhaustion, it monetizes it. It takes the symptom of a systemic problem and creates a consumer market around managing the symptom without ever addressing the cause. And the time and money spent on self-care products becomes another extraction, another demand on your already depleted resources. Most people miss this about why self-care fails as a solution to systemic exhaustion. True self-care, the kind that actually restores human function, is not a product. It's a condition. It's adequate sleep, unstructured free time, physical movement that isn't optimized for productivity, deep connection with people you love, time in nature without a podcast in your ears, time with absolutely nothing to do. These forms of genuine restoration can't be purchased because they require the one thing the system won't give you: time. Unmonetized, unoptimized, genuinely free time. The self-care industry sells products as substitutes for the time they know you don't have. And the substitutes don't work because they're not what you actually need. What you need can't be put in a jar. Failed solution 3. Boundary setting. Learn to say no. Protect your time. Don't check email after 6. Create work-life balance. This advice is technically correct and practically impossible for most workers in the current economic environment. The advice assumes that the worker has the power to enforce the boundary without consequence. Most don't. Saying no to work has consequences. Real, measurable, career-affecting consequences. In an economy where job security is precarious, where workers are treated as interchangeable, where performance reviews incorporate subjective assessments of dedication and commitment, and where the expectation of constant availability is embedded in organizational culture so deeply that it's never stated explicitly because it doesn't need to be. Setting boundaries is not a neutral act. It's a risk. The entry-level employee can't set boundaries because they have no leverage, and visible boundary setting marks them as not a team player. The hourly worker can't set boundaries because declining hours means declining income they need for survival. The person whose continued employment depends on their manager's subjective assessment of their attitude can't set boundaries because boundaries look like attitude problems to managers who equate availability with loyalty. The freelancer can't set boundaries because saying no to a client means the client finds someone who says yes. Boundary setting advice is class-blind advice. It works for people who already have the organizational power, the financial cushion, or the professional scarcity to enforce boundaries without existential risk. It fails for everyone else, which is most people. The people who need boundaries most are the people who can least afford to set them. And the advice never acknowledges this reality, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that the problem is structural, not personal. Failed solution 4. Mindset shifts. Change your relationship with work. Find meaning in what you do. Practice gratitude. These solutions attempt to change your perception of the exhaustion without changing the conditions producing it. They ask you to feel differently about a situation that is objectively depleting. And when the mindset shift doesn't stick, which it doesn't because the conditions producing the exhaustion are unchanged, the failure becomes another source of guilt. You couldn't even change your mindset. Something must be really wrong with you. Here's what actually happens when someone cycles through all the mainstream solutions without finding relief. They conclude that the problem is them. They've tried everything. The productivity system, the self-care routine, the boundaries, the mindset work. Nothing worked. Therefore, the problem must be personal. Something uniquely wrong with them that prevents them from thriving in a system where everyone else seems to be managing. This conclusion is the system's greatest achievement. The exhausted worker, having tried every personal solution and failed, attributes the failure to personal inadequacy rather than systemic design. The system remains unexamined. The worker remains exhausted and now also ashamed, and the cycle continues. The real reason every solution fails is that every solution is aimed at the wrong target. The target isn't your schedule, your habits, your mindset, your boundaries. The target is the structural arrangement that requires your exhaustion to function. Until that target is addressed, every personal solution will produce temporary relief followed by the return of the same condition, because the condition is structural, and personal solutions don't fix structural problems. They manage them, temporarily, expensively, and ultimately unsuccessfully. So what actually works? Chapter 5, Reclaiming Your Life. What actually works? I'm going to be honest about the scope of what individual action can accomplish against a structural problem. Individual action cannot dismantle the exhaustion economy. The exhaustion economy is maintained by corporate structures, regulatory frameworks, cultural narratives, and economic incentives that operate far above the level of individual choice. Telling you that you can personally fix a systemic problem would be another version of the lie that got you here. The lie that says your exhaustion is a personal problem with a personal solution. What individual action can do is create enough space within the system for you to function as a human being rather than a production unit. And that space, small as it might seem, changes everything. Because in that space, your critical thinking returns. Your relationships begin to recover. Your health stabilizes. Your ambition rekindles. And your awareness of the system sharpens enough to see what collective action might actually change. Here is what works, not as a cure, as a reclamation. Reclamation 1. Identify your real hours and your ghost hours. Real hours are hours where you're actually producing value or genuinely recovering. Ghost hours are hours that are consumed by the system without producing value for you or real recovery. The commute that could be shortened or eliminated. The meetings that could be emails. The email checking that happens reflexively rather than intentionally. The scroll sessions that feel like rest but aren't. The performative busyness that signals productivity without producing anything. Most people, when they honestly audit their time, discover that a significant portion of their day is consumed by ghost hours. Hours that aren't work and aren't rest. Hours that belong to the system's extraction process, without even producing the wages that extraction supposedly justifies. This is crucial. Reclaiming ghost hours is the highest leverage action available to an individual within the current system. You can't easily change your required work hours, but you can identify and reclaim the hours that the system is taking without paying for. The mindless scroll that captures an hour every evening, reclaimed. the commute that could be reduced by 15 minutes through route optimization or schedule adjustment. Reclaimed. The meeting that doesn't require your presence. Reclaimed. Each ghost hour converted to either genuine rest or genuine purpose returns energy to a budget that has been running a deficit for years. Reclamation 2. Protect sleep as a non-negotiable foundation, not as self-care, not as a luxury, not as something you'll get to when things calm down. Things will never calm down. The system is not designed to calm down. Sleep must be protected inside the storm, not after it, because the storm is permanent. Sleep is the single most effective recovery mechanism available to the human body and mind. During adequate sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. Memory consolidation occurs. Emotional processing happens. The immune system activates repair protocols. Hormonal balance is restored. Every major system in your body uses sleep as its maintenance window, and it is the mechanism most consistently sacrificed by the exhaustion economy. The work deadline pushes bedtime back. The stress makes falling asleep harder. The phone next to the bed interrupts sleep architecture with its light and its notifications, and its constant reminder that the system is waiting for you to return. The morning alarm forces you awake before the final sleep cycle completes, and the cycle of deprivation compounds across days, weeks, months, and years, until the sleep debt is so massive that no single night of adequate sleep can repay it. Research on chronic sleep restriction shows that every hour of sleep deprivation produces measurable degradation in cognitive function, emotional regulation, immune response, and metabolic health. People who consistently sleep less than 7 hours show the same cognitive impairment as people who are legally intoxicated. They make worse decisions. They react more emotionally. They process information more slowly. They miss things that a rested brain would catch. And they don't know they're impaired because the impairment itself prevents the self-awareness that would detect it. You think you're functioning fine on 6 hours. You're not. You're functioning the way a drunk person thinks they're driving fine. The impairment is invisible to the impaired. Protecting sleep means treating sleep time with the same non-negotiable quality you give to showing up at work. You wouldn't skip a workday because you felt like watching another episode. Don't skip sleep for the same reason. Set a hard cutoff for screens. Set a hard cutoff for work communication. Set a hard cutoff for everything that isn't the dark, quiet, cool environment that your biology requires for proper restoration. And defend that cutoff the way you defend any non-negotiable commitment, because it is one, the most important one you have. Most people miss this about why sleep protection is an act of resistance rather than self-indulgence. The attention economy's business model depends on your sleep deprivation. Every hour you spend scrolling past your biological bedtime is an hour of attention that has been monetized by platforms whose revenue is directly proportional to the time they extract from your recovery period. Protecting your sleep isn't just healthy. It's a refusal to participate in the extraction. You are choosing your brain's recovery over a platform's revenue. And that choice, repeated nightly, produces compound returns in cognitive function, emotional capacity, and physical health that no wellness product can match. Reclamation 3. Create non-negotiable recovery blocks, Not self-care rituals, recovery blocks, blocks of time where no extraction occurs, no work, no screens, no productivity, no optimization, no guilt. Genuine neurological and physiological recovery, walking without a podcast, sitting without scrolling, cooking without multitasking, being with another person without the device that connects you to the system that's depleting you. The research on genuine recovery is clear. The brain requires periods of low stimulation to consolidate memories, process emotions, and restore executive function. The body requires periods of parasympathetic activation, the rest and digest state, to repair tissue, regulate hormones, and maintain immune function. These recovery processes cannot occur during stimulation. They cannot occur during content consumption. They cannot occur during anything that requires sustained attention. They require genuine downtime, which is exactly what the exhaustion economy is designed to prevent. Here's what actually happens when someone implements non-negotiable recovery blocks consistently. The first week is uncomfortable. The guilt fires. The restlessness burns. The habitual reach for the phone persists. The second week, the acute withdrawal from constant stimulation fades. The third week, cognitive function begins to noticeably improve. Creativity returns. Ideas appear. The ability to think beyond the immediate crisis starts to reconstitute. By the fourth week, the person begins to look like someone who lives a life rather than someone who survives a schedule. Not because they changed their job or their income or their circumstances. Because they reclaimed recovery time from the attention economy and allowed their biology to function as designed. Reclamation 4. Decouple your identity from your productivity. This is the internal work that makes the external changes sustainable. As long as your worth equals your output, rest will feel like worthlessness and the guilt will prevent recovery. The decoupling doesn't happen through affirmation. It happens through evidence. Through the daily practice of doing nothing productive and observing that you still have value, that the people who love you don't love you for your output, that your existence doesn't require justification through work. This is the deepest programming to undo because the identity fusion has been running since adolescence in most people. It requires patience. It requires repetition. And it requires the willingness to sit in the discomfort of unproductivity long enough to discover that the discomfort is the programming, not the reality. Reclamation 5. Build towards structural independence. This is the long game. The reclamations above create space. This reclamation uses that space to build something that changes your structural position within the exhaustion economy, developing skills that increase your leverage in the labor market, building income streams that don't require your physical presence during fixed hours, creating assets that generate value independent of your continued exhaustion. Moving toward work arrangements that give you control over your time, rather than selling your time to someone else's control. This isn't just start a business advice. This is the recognition that within the exhaustion economy, the only sustainable exit from compulsory exhaustion is changing your structural relationship to the system, from pure laborer to someone with leverage. From someone who sells all their time to someone who controls some of their time. From someone whose exhaustion is required by the system to someone whose independence is protected from it. This transition takes years, not months. It requires the very energy that the system is designed to extract, which is why reclamations 1 through 4 matter so much. They create the small energy surplus that makes reclamation 5 possible. The real reason individual reclamation matters, even though it doesn't fix the system, is that it restores the human capacities that collective action requires. You can't organize a movement when you're too tired to attend a meeting. You can't advocate for policy change when you're too depleted to write a letter. You can't build community infrastructure when you don't have the energy to talk to your neighbors. Individual reclamation doesn't replace collective action. It makes collective action possible. And collective action, people organizing together to demand structural change in working conditions, compensation, and the regulatory frameworks that maintain the exhaustion economy, is what actually changes the system. Your reclamation is not selfish, it's prerequisite. Closing thoughts. What happens when you stop being tired? I want to say something to the version of you that's listening to this right now. The one who's probably tired. The one who probably started this audiobook hoping for another productivity tip, another life hack, another way to squeeze a little more performance out of a body and mind that have been running on empty for longer than you want to admit. I didn't give you a hack, I gave you the truth. They need you tired, not a conspiracy, not a secret room of powerful people deciding your fate, something simpler and harder to fight than that, a system. An arrangement of economic incentives where your exhaustion is profitable for someone who isn't you. The shareholders who capture the gap between your productivity and your paycheck. The platforms that monetize the hours you should be sleeping. The industries that created the problem and then sell you the Band-Aid at a markup. The culture that taught you to say, "I'm so busy," like it's a me. Dull when it's actually a wound. They need you tired because a tired person is a manageable person. A tired person doesn't ask hard questions, doesn't push back on unfair compensation, doesn't organize with other tired people, doesn't have the energy to imagine that things could be different. A tired person goes to work, comes home, stares at a screen, sleeps badly, and does it again, and again, and again. Until the years have passed, and the body has degraded, and the relationships have thinned, and the ambitions have gone so quiet you forgot you ever had them. That was supposed to be your life. That was the plan the system had for you. But you just spent an hour seeing the machine from the outside. You saw the 4 mechanisms keeping it running, the productivity gap, the cost squeeze, the always-on infrastructure, the identity fusion. You saw the 5 production lines manufacturing your daily tiredness, and you saw the hidden costs. The things being taken from you that are worth so much more than energy. Your thinking, your relationships, your health, your dreams, your ability to see clearly enough to know that something is wrong. Now you see it, and you can't unsee it. So tonight, try something. When the workday ends, let it end. Put the phone in another room. Don't check the email. Don't open the laptop. Don't scroll. I know the discomfort will come, the restlessness, the guilt. The voice that says you should be doing something productive. That voice is not yours. That voice belongs to the system. It was installed in you through years of cultural programming that equated your worth with your output. Let the voice talk. Don't obey it. Sit somewhere quiet. Do nothing. Let the silence feel strange. Let the boredom arrive. And underneath the boredom, underneath the guilt, underneath the restlessness, you'll find something you haven't felt in a very long time. Your own mind, thinking clearly, without exhaustion sitting on top of every thought. That clarity is what they're afraid of. That's what the exhaustion was built to prevent. Rest tonight, not because you earned it, because you need it, and because a rested you is the most dangerous thing the exhaustion economy can produce. You've been tired long enough. It's time to see what you're capable of when you're not.